Hello again, friends, and welcome to another segment of Doc G's Wine and Spirits Review. Coming to you for our second episode of 2022. And if you recall, one of the things that I was hoping to do for the 2022 season is to spend a little more time going into detail about geographic regions where wines are grown. And tonight will be our first episode that focuses on a very important United States wine area that I have had the opportunity to visit innumerable times. And that would be the Finger Lakes region in upstate New York. So for tonight, that is our topic. Cheers and welcome. That is definitely a special wine from the Finger Lakes region. So what I like to do in these features where I'm going to talk about a particular wine region is really focus more on the wine region than on specific recommendations for wines that you can go purchase. This is really just to share some information with you so that in the event you are able to either visit the region or to purchase wines from that region, you know a little bit more about it than you did before you watched this. So let's talk about the Finger Lakes in New York and New York State winemaking in general. So let's go way back. Let's go back a couple centuries ago. The Dutch came here in the 1600s and they imported the Vitis vinifera wine grapes, which are basically I'll talk about that a little bit more later, European style wines, Riesling, Chardonnay, etc. And quite frankly, the soil and the climate and their knowledge of winemaking was missing. So the Vitis vinifera grapes did not really flourish here for centuries, especially in the New York State area. So let's fast forward. Let's come up to the 1950s. Let's bring in and welcome a gentleman named Dr. Konstantin Frank. He was a Ukrainian who lived in the United States and settled in the Finger Lakes area, hoping to bring Vitis, PhD, pretty bright guy, bring Vitis vinifera to the New World. And he was very successful in the Finger Lakes in the 1950s, working with Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, at the base of Keuka Lake, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and helped the Finger Lakes wine region grow into what it has become today. Fortunately for all of us, Dr. Frank still has a presence, being his winery, in the town of Hammondsport at the base of Keuka Lake in upstate New York. So, Vitis vinifera grapes are generally the old world European grapes that we've taken for granted here in the United States now. Chardonnay, Riesling, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Pinot Gris. Most of the wines that you drink are probably of Vitis vinifera origin. And that's another conversation for another time. It's a little bit technical description of the grapes and how they're classified, because there are Vitis lambrusca and other Vitis, meaning vine types, that we could talk about. If you remember my conversation many segments ago, all kinds of fruit have many different varieties, and I always look at apples as another example of how the plant world really has a huge amount of diversity in terms of the kinds of species and subspecies that you can experience. Grapes are no different. So let's talk a little bit about what I hope to do tonight before I get into that is to give you a little bit of background in these segments of the area, more than just about wine, what you can experience in the area, major cities, culturally what the area means, and other general facts that may make you, believe it or not, want to visit those regions or explore more of their wines. I always say that you can experience the culture of a region if you know a little bit more about the grapes and the winemaking that goes on in that particular area. I've been a proponent of that for as long as I've been involved in my wine adventures. So with that, let's talk about New York State. And I'm going to just focus really on the Finger Lakes tonight because the New York State has the Hudson Valley. It has grapes that are grown out by Lake Erie. It also has a very fertile grape growing and winemaking culture on Long Island in New York. I've been there. It's not my purpose to talk about Long Island tonight because their grapes, frankly, based on the climate, are a little bit different than what you would find in upstate New York. So for now, we'll focus on New York State as an entity. You may or may not be aware of it, but New York State is the third largest producer of grapes and wine in the United States. So that is fairly significant, and the Finger Lakes contributes largely to being in that third slot. Not that the volume is important. What is important is to know that New York State is a very significant player in the world of good wine. So the Finger Lakes, and I know I've done a spot on the Finger Lakes in the past, and I was actually there and came to you live from Seneca Lake. I don't want this to be duplicative of that. It will actually be more focused on the Finger Lakes as a region. So yes, you're going to hear some things that I have maybe already mentioned. That's not important because, you know, hearing things a second and third time help to solidify them in your memory. So hopefully this will inspire you even more to head to the Finger Lakes and sample some of their good wines, because it definitely, from where I'm sitting right now, you can be there in 4.5 hours. And I'm telling you, you could spend 2 weeks there until you visited all of their really good wineries and explore the area. It's really up there. It's not just about wine, which I'll get into in a couple minutes. So the Finger Lakes consists of a number of lakes, but the ones that we want to talk about are very 4 specific lakes, which are where the abundance of the wineries are. And that would be, starting with the biggest lakes of all of them, Seneca Lake. Then you also have Cayuga Lake, which is very similar in size and scope to Seneca Lake. Then there is Cayuga Lake, and there's also Canandaigua. These are the four wine region lakes that Canandaigua is probably not one that you'll spend a lot of time on, but the other 3, there are fantastic, and I'm going to say it, world-class wineries on those other 3 lakes within 4.5 hours of at least where I'm sitting right now. And based on where you are, I would suggest to you to find somehow, maybe in this COVID cave, to get away and go visit the Finger Lakes any time of the year. It doesn't matter. I've been there so much that each season has its charm. The winter is beautiful for watching. There's abundance of waterfalls in the Finger Lakes, and watching the waterfalls kind of half freeze. The spring is beautiful for bud break. The summer is great because while it's warm, it's not stifling in the Finger Lakes. It's rare to see a hot summer day to go above 85 degrees. And in the fall, the changing of the leaves, if you're into that, it is one of the most picturesque places you could be in the eastern United States when the leaf change occurs in the fall. So I can tell you that the Finger Lakes is a destination for wine or for other reasons. So I would highly encourage you, if you have the chance to get away with friends, get away just on your own with your spouse, or if you're solo and you just want to go get away for a while, it is a wonderful place Been visiting there for over 20, almost 20 years now. Never have I been bored in the Finger Lakes. So I hope you get that chance. So, how did the Finger Lakes come about? Well, it is planetary. 2 million years ago. And I'm going to summarize it. Some really serious glaciers rolled through the area. And they carved out these lakes that exist there now. And when those glaciers receded, they left some pretty serious holes in the ground. And in our terms, I can't even fathom 2 million years. All I know is the result of where I am now and where we all are now in this day and age. There are some beautiful glacial lakes in upstate New York that have a lot of great wineries all around them. And I highly suggest that you find a way to go see them. Because not only are they beautiful views, there is some great wine that is being grown as a result of what happened 2 million years ago during the Ice Age. So I hope you get that chance. This is a byproduct of that. I'll talk about this wine in a minute. So a little bit more about the region. If you would choose to visit the area, there are a number of smaller cities in the area. It is not a populous area. There are on Seneca Lake. I'm going to go for each of the lakes and talk about them. At the northern tip of Seneca Lake is the town of Geneva. It's where my son happens to live right now. It's a town that, well, I have stayed in numerous times, even before my son lived there. He had a job opportunity, and that's why he's there. We'll just let that go for what it is. At the bottom of Seneca Lake, for you racing fans, is a town called Watkins Glen. Beautiful park there with waterfalls, hiking. It's just a great place. And then you move over to Keuka Lake, which is to the west of Seneca Lake, and Keuka Lake is a beautiful lake as well. At the base of Keuka Lake is a little town called Hammondsport. Well, actually a couple towns, because Keuka Lake actually forks. At the bottom of one fork is the town called Hammondsport, and at the bottom of another fork is a town called Ithaca, which is not a Yale, excuse me, confusing my metaphors here, which is an Ivy League town that houses Cornell University. If you ever want to go to Ithaca and stay in a hotel, you're going to pay Ivy League prices, trust me. But it's a great little town. And that's where Constantine Frank did his work with the people in the area back in the 50s to help grow the Finger Lakes region into what it has become today. So those are the major towns in the Finger Lakes region. There are other smaller ones that probably would not resonate with you, but from a geographic standpoint, 2 hours to the west of the Finger Lakes on I-90 at the top of the Finger Lakes, top at the north, is Buffalo, and an hour to the west is Rochester. So there are some major metropolitan areas in upstate New York that are very close to the Finger Lakes region, and I can tell you from all of the years, 20 years more or less, of traveling to the Finger Lakes, people come from all over the country to visit the Finger Lakes. It is, without a doubt, a wine destination that if you're seriously into wine, you should find some way to make a visit and go experience the lake culture, as it were. And I would also tell you, from a, you know me, quality QPR, quality price ratio standpoint, you're not going to need to take a loan to buy a lot of good wines from the Finger Lakes region. And I'm talking about whites, reds, and rosés. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So that kind of gives you a basic overview of the whole area. I'll talk a little bit more when we sample these wines. I'll wind in some stories that may be of interest to you of my adventures in the Finger Lakes. And the reason that I chose this one first, it is the wine region that I have visited around the world with which I have the most experience and interaction and have purchased wines that I have actually been able to go visit the wineries. I love Sonoma, I love Napa, but you know what? It's 3,000 miles away. That's kind of a special trip. The Finger Lakes, I can do as often as my heart desires. And I can tell you, I have done it more often than I like to admit. So let's talk about the Finger Lakes in terms of the grapes that are important in the region. So if you take a look at, some people might think, well, you know, I've done some research and they say, well, you know, the Finger Lakes aren't really big on reds and they're more for the whites and the Rieslings. And I'm going to tell you, that's wrong. Now, I'm not going to say that the greatest reds in the world, or even the greatest whites in the world, come from the Finger Lakes. But I am going to tell you this, that the winemakers in the Finger Lakes, the really good ones, and a lot of these wineries are small boutique wineries. They're not owned by some corporation. These are all people working hard, working the land, trying to make a dollar and a reputation selling their wine. And their wine is good. It's better than good. Some of it is world class. You can't worry about whether the national magazines or the international magazines are going to cover an area to tell you how to think about a wine. You need to let your palate determine the value of a wine rather than someone else telling you how to think. And I might be guilty of that too. I'm only telling you that as an amateur wine aficionado, some of the best wines I have ever sampled have come from the Finger Lakes region. Point blank. Not the best all the time, because I like to sample wines from all over the world. But I can tell you that the wines from this region are superb when they're made at their best. And I hope the ones that I show you tonight will be emblematic of the good wines that you can find in the region. So let's talk about what wines did Dr. Frank finally make viable in the Finger Lakes region. You can get good Chardonnay. You can get great Riesling. The Finger Lakes is synonymous with world-class Rieslings. You can get decent, not the best in the world, but definitely worthy of your putting it in your glass and buying it, Sauvignon Blanc. You can get fantastic Gewürztraminer, which is kind of a niche wine for having Asian-style cuisine. It's got a little bit of a floral note to it. Actually works well with Thanksgiving turkey because of the umami flavor that you get out of turkey. And there's a little bit of Gruner Veltliner going on in the Finger Lakes, German-style grape. And believe it or not, there's plenty of good Pinot Gris, or Pinot Grigio, whatever language you want to translate it into, in the Finger Lakes. So their white wines, and there are blends that they make as well, are fantastic. You can get unoaked and oaked Chardonnay, you can get great Riesling. The one thing that I would say about any Finger Lakes wine that you encounter is that it has a Finger Lakes personality. You can, if your palate is trained enough, and I think mine's getting there after years of having it, you can tell the difference between a Riesling from Germany and a Riesling from Australia, which they do, and a Riesling from the Finger Lakes. There is just a certain quality that is imparted. Remember, the nutrients and the flavor compounds that are within a wine are based on the soil in which it grows. So it only stands to reason that a Riesling from the Finger Lakes will not exactly be like a Riesling from the Moselle in Germany. That's a good thing. I don't see that as a bad thing. And I happen to have a Riesling here in my glass. And this is not your sweet Riesling. This is dry. Let me pause. I save sweeter Rieslings for the right food combo. But in general, I like my Rieslings bone dry, like this one is from the Finger Lakes. So let's talk about the red wines that are prominent. Because the red wines from the Finger Lakes, you have to be very careful. I'm going to be quite honest. They can't grow certain red grapes. So you're not ever going to find a Sangiovese from the Finger Lakes. The climate just can't manage the grape. So you're going to get wines that are more suited to a little bit. They don't have the length of sunlight and the length of heat in the growing season and ripening season to be able to produce world-class wines from certain grapes. Like Rhone Valley, you're not going to get Grenache from the Finger Lakes. It won't work. But the grapes that will work in the Finger Lakes are Cabernet Franc, which is fantastic. Probably their number one best profile for a red grape in the Finger Lakes. Not far behind it is Pinot Noir. I know that Pinot Noir in California many times is not 100% Pinot Noir. When you get Pinot Noirs from the Finger Lakes, they're almost like big rosés. They're Pinot Noir 100%. The Finger Lakes doesn't play that game about what California does with they only have to have 70 to 75% of the wine be a certain grape to call it that grape. Finger Lakes Pinot Noirs you can see through. And I have one here tonight. I'm not going to sample that one, but I just want to point it out to you. Cabernet Sauvignon by some winemakers up there has found a niche. It's a lighter bodied Cabernet Sauvignon, but it is still very good. There's a grape that's grown in the Finger Lakes, which is a cool climate red called Lemberger, or also known as Blaufränkisch from the German. That's a German red. And there are wineries up there doing amazing things with a grape called Lemberger, Blaufränkisch. If you get a chance to get it, and I know you won't find it much in PA liquor stores, but it is a great light-bodied red wine that will pair well with a variety of foods that go with red wines. And finally, you'll find a few winemakers up there who will do Merlot and some other. There's some obscure red grape like Zweigelt from Austria. There's a winery or two up in the Finger Lakes that does Saperavi, which is a big red from the Eastern European countries back in the day. There's one actually up there that's doing a little bit with Terladego. There are some wineries who are willing to go out and try to experiment with some really good wines. And that's what I really find to be very, I don't know the word, I'll say fascinating about the Finger Lakes wine region, is that most of these are small, boutique, non-corporate, family-owned wineries trying to put good wines out into the wine world. And, there's over 100 wineries in the Finger Lakes. But I can tell you, of those 100, I would only say there are, and I don't even like to be critical, most of them can put a good wine in the bottle. There are some that are probably a little bit less to my palate, so I don't want to be critical. I never liked, you've followed me long enough. I do not like to be critical of anyone else's palate, because what I find is good for me may not be good for you. It depends on where you are in your wine journey, how much wine you have had over the years, how much you've studied the topic. So it's got a lot of factors. All I know is that there are some really great wineries in this region that you should try to find. So, at this point, let's talk then about, I'd like to recommend to you specific wineries that I have been to. I have been traveling to the Finger Lakes for approximately 20 years. So on Seneca Lake, there are, let me check my notes here, there are 35 different wineries on Seneca Lake. And if you look at the lakes, as there are those long fingers, Seneca Lake's 38 miles in length. So from Watkins Glen at the southern point of Seneca Lake to Geneva at the northern point, it's basically 40 miles. You're talking, and because it's only a 2-lane highway, you're talking an hour. So if you want to do the loop on the west shore and the east shore of Seneca Lake, you're going to need some serious time, because one, you're going to stop and sit and drink. So there's no way you can do 35 wineries, even in a weekend. So you pick out the ones that you think maybe that I recommend, or that you've researched and have the kind of wines that you might like, and you make yourself. That's day one, Seneca Lake. And around Seneca Lake, the wineries that I really appreciate are Hermann Wiemer, Shaw Winery, Damiani, Hosmer, Boundary Breaks, Silver Thread. And there are a few others. Red Tail Ridge is another one that comes to mind when I think about the great wineries on Seneca Lake. Now remember, 35 wineries around that whole area. 35. That's quite a few. So let's go to the second most populous in terms of wineries lake in the Finger Lakes, and that's called Cayuga. K-E-U-K-A. Cayuga. And it has a fork. It looks kind of like a slingshot. There are 5 wineries, 4 or 5 that I'd like to recommend. One is Domaine Lesueur, and I have some of their wines here tonight. Another one is Ravines. Another one is Heron Hill. Most beautiful view in all of the Finger Lakes. And of course, Dr. Constantine Frank's winery, which is still going strong after all these years and still producing world-class wines from Vitis vinifera grapes in the Finger Lakes. And then there's only one winery on Canandaigua that I've actually had the desire to visit, and that is a winery called Inspire Moore. And they actually make some fantastic wines on all of the grapes that I talked to you about here tonight. So, why am I doing the Finger Lakes with you again tonight? For a number of reasons. The Finger Lakes has been very close to me personally. In 2002, I went with family to, every year they hold these winery events, and it would be the Christmas Trail. You would go visit, pay a ticket in advance, you'd rent a limo and you'd drive around, and every winery would give out a little Christmas ornament. I still have some of those Christmas ornaments. They're very personal, very important to me. We still hang them every year on our Christmas tree because they bring back memories. In 2002, when we were able to go to the Finger Lakes and visit the wineries and get our Christmas ornament. My friends, my wine group, we have taken various trips to the Finger Lakes. We've rented homes. We've cooked for each other. We've visited numerous wineries repeatedly without feeling we were bored,
or seeing something that there's always something new. It was always very exciting. For me personally, my son moved up to the area to take a job in 2016. So I've been going up there regularly ever since. So from 2002 to the present, I have seen the growth and the evolution of winemaking in the Finger Lakes. And I can only tell you that it continues to improve and get better. The wineries that I've recommended to you have become my favorites. Their wines are always in my cellar because I love what they do. And I'm very proud to have them as part of my wine collection. So, my tie to the Finger Lakes is based on 2 decades of experience with the area. And I love going there. It never grows old. The scenery, the lakes, the climate, the experience. And I would add to it, since this is Doc G's wine and spirits, and I'll throw in beer review, there are a few great distilleries in the area doing great things with gin and whiskey and other spirits. And there are all over the landscape small family-style breweries who cater to the local crowd, who are making wonderful beers that probably will never reach the mainstream, but nevertheless, they are good. So the sum, before I sample a couple of these wines for you, of what I want to say is, go to the Finger Lakes. You will not be sorry. I would not steer you wrong, and I hope you take me up on that suggestion. So to close out, I'm going to just talk about a few wines, because I really wanted it to be tonight about the whole Finger Lakes AVA culture. And I hope I've been able to give you a good idea of what you can expect to find if you were ever so lucky to take a trip, take a weekend, take a couple days, whatever it is it requires, to visit this wonderful part of American winemaking. So with that, let's go to the wines that I want to talk about. Our first, you know I can never go away without a wine recommendation. So I'm going to sample 2 for you, but I'm going to recommend 4. One of my favorite wineries on Cayuga Lake is a winery called Ravines. They do a Chardonnay, they do a sparkling. I didn't even talk about that much. They do a rosé. And by the way, when I went back over the wine grapes that you can find in the Finger Lakes, there are a couple wineries up there doing fantastic things with rosé. Heart and Hands, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, does one of the best Pinot Noir rosés I've ever had. Hosmer Winery, which I mentioned was one of the wineries on Seneca that I like, does one of the best Cab Franc and Lemberger rosés I have ever had. Sheldrake Point on Cayuga Lake does wonderful things with rosé as well. So there are great rosés to be had in the area as well. So, with that said, the first one that I'm going to talk about tonight is a Riesling. This one happens to be a 2016. And from an aging standpoint, any white that you have that's more than 6 years old, it's probably time to drink it. Riesling ages probably better than any of the white wines that are produced. So this 2016 Ravines, state bottle, 12.5 ABV. I can tell you point blank, a hint of citrus, and a little bit. Whenever you talk about a Riesling, you talk about petrol on the nose. And the petrol on the nose, it can be off-putting, but it's very light, like gas. It smells a little bit like gasoline. If you always like that smell, you'll love Riesling. But it also has apricot and pear, or not apricot, or excuse me, not pear, a little bit of apricot, some citrus. Very tart. Hits you right behind. In the back. I love that. Great. You know what? There are so many foods to pair with Riesling. I'm not even going to get into it. Fish, white meat, Asian food. Just a glass. Where have you heard that before? So, this Riesling is from Ravines, 2016. At the time, probably under $20 a bottle. Amazing. So let's move that one aside. Our second white, and another grape that does very well. Excuse me, that would not be the one. This one here, one of my favorite wineries that only came about in the last 7 or 8 years. A winery called Domaine Le Sou, a French family that found this region in the Finger Lakes so compelling. They're a generations old winemaking family. Their son came here with his wife to make wine. And I can tell you, they're already on the Robert Parker map. And Robert Parker is an eminent world wine critic. Their wines have been cited. This wine in particular is a Chardonnay unoaked. I tend to prefer unoaked Chardonnay because I love the profile that Chardonnay offers. This wine might as well be a Burgundian Chardonnay. I have had it before. It is fantastic. It has the profile of the apple and pear and crisp minerality that a good unoaked Chardonnay should have. That is from Domaine Le Sou. So if you can find, let me backtrack. You're not going to find Domaine Le Sou in PA Wine and Spirits or a Total Wine. You're going to have to go to the Finger Lakes. So go. You won't be sorry. $18 a bottle, by the way. 18. And that is a 2018. And I'm sure that will sit well for a couple of years. Now let's move to the two reds that I have for you tonight that come from the Finger Lakes. I'm going to save this one for last, for that's Domaine Le Sou. Pinot Noir from Heart and Hands. Now, if you remember, in a previous spot, I actually featured this winery. Their Pinot Noir, and they do a number of Pinot Noirs from different vineyards. Just their stock Pinot Noir may be one of the best Pinot Noirs from France, from California, from anywhere that I have ever tried. It's a little bit lighter bodied, a little bit more acid on it, but it is such a food-friendly wine that you will just fall in love with it if you have the chance to buy it. Heart and Hands Winery, their basic Pinot Noir, is sometimes available in Pennsylvania. And it is well worth your time to give it a try. But if you should have the opportunity to go to the Finger Lakes, this is one of the recommended wineries on Cayuga Lake, which is another huge lake, very similar to Seneca, in the Finger Lakes wine region. It's in a little town called Union Springs, and it's out in the, it feels like the middle of nowhere, but I can tell you when you drink their wine, you'll feel like you're in the middle of somewhere. Fantastic wines from Heart and Hands. So what I'd like to finish with is another wine from one of my favorite wineries in the Finger Lakes, and that is a Cab Franc. And if you remember, if you're following me long enough, you know that Cabernet Franc is one of my favorite red wines. This Cabernet Franc is basically, before it got to the United States, was a wine that was used in the Bordeaux blends on the left bank and the right bank, if you remember the conversation about Bordeaux. And it was relegated to a blending wine. But Cabernet Franc, over the years, has come into its own. The Finger Lakes, especially, has elevated Cabernet Franc to its own value as a single varietal wine. Argentina and Chile have done the same, and some other regions of the United States have taken Cabernet Franc and found a way to make it worthy to be in the bottle alone without it being blended. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with blends, but this grape is fantastic. Not good, it's fantastic on its own. So the wine that you had before you is a 2016. This could stay in the bottle for another 10 years. So it just continues to age, which is like what all great Bordeaux's do. But the thing that you'll find, if you remember when I mentioned earlier, let me move this glass out of the way. The Cabernet Franc from the Finger Lakes is not the same as a Cabernet Franc from Chinon in France, or the same even as a Cabernet Franc from Virginia, which is prominent in Cab Franc production as well. It's not the same as a Cab Franc from Pennsylvania. It's not the same as a Cab Franc grown in California, which grows Cab Franc as well. The Cab Francs in the Finger Lakes are influenced by the climate and the soil in which they are produced. And I can tell you this, the Cab Francs grown in the Finger Lake are my favorite. They just have a profile, they taste a little young, they've got a little bit of green pepper on them, they've got a nice crisp acidity to them, and they make a fantastic rosé from the Finger Lakes as well. Little violet, little pepper, very smooth. They don't have tannins that rip your mouth apart. A little bit of red fruit on the nose. Bring on the burgers. Bring on the steak. So with that, I know I've run a little long tonight, but I did so on purpose because the Finger Lakes is an area that I think needs a little bit more attention than it gets. And I'm happy to say that I've spent most of my wine adventures personally in this wonderful wine region. My only regret is that this wine is not available in your local stores and where you shop for wine. But you know what? What's hidden in that is you got to get in your car, go take a trip, get out of the house, go visit the area, because I'm telling you point blank, you will not be sorry. The Finger Lakes is probably in my opinion, one of the most undervalued wine regions in the world. There's so many great wines there and so many great things to do and see that I hope you get the chance to go and see it firsthand. So, until the next time, think about planning your trip to the Finger Lakes, and stay safe and be healthy, and cheers.